Hello, everyone. This is Miss Richardson, and I have been getting some requests recently for some help on the factorial question. So that's what we're going to do here for today. So, this is the problem factorial from Unit 5, Lesson 7 on for loops practice. And this is the starting code that you get. It creates a variable for you called n, where the user is going to enter a starting value for the factorial. And then it just gives you a start function. So that's not a lot to work with, but it gives us something. So the main question that I have to ask myself anytime I'm working with a program is, what do I want my program to do? So the first question is factorial. What is that and how does it work? So the idea of a factorial is you have a number that goes in and the exclamation point gives it the factorial in math notation. And all that means is it's that number times everything below it. So 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Now, this right here should be pinging on your radar with the coding because you can see that it's a countdown 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that is where the for loop works into this. Now, there's actually two possible ways because in multiplication, it doesn't matter which order these numbers are in as long as you multiply. So it is possible to write this program where you count backwards like this from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or it's possible to count up where it's 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5. So we're actually going to go ahead and practice both of these. So in both of them, we're going to have a for loop. And in the one that's counting backwards, I'm going to have a variable that starts at some value. I'm going to have it count down to 0, but I don't want it to include 0 because we're multiplying. And then I'm going to have it decrease, so decrement. So it's going to count down like that. And this one, I'm going to have my I start at some value. I'm going to have I count up to and equal to the highest value possible, and then I will increment. Okay. Now, in both cases, I'm going to need a variable to hold my factorial. So before I get into my for loops, I'm going to need to make a variable to hold that, and then we'll go from there. So let's switch over to our editor. So I'm going to start off with the one where we count from 1 up to the highest possible number. Okay. And that's just because that's how most of our for loops have gone. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a variable called factorial that's going to hold a value. For right now, I'm going to set it to 1 because all factorial multiplication is going to start off at 1. All right, so now let's go ahead and create our for loop. A for loop, you create a variable called I, and you initialize it to something. In this case, I'm going to initialize it to my factorial starting at 1. And then, nope, I'm going to do I is less than or equal to, and then I'm going to use this variable right here, n, because I don't want it to go above that number. Then I'm going to do I plus plus. So that's my for loop header. Now from there, I'll need to set up some curly braces. And then the next part of the notation, I want to store a number. I want to take factorial and I want to store a number in it. So in this case, it's storing the number 1. And then I want it to multiply by the next number up. Okay, so to do that, you're going to multiply. And then whatever that answer is, I want it to get stored back in factorial. So you're going to do this notation. This means factorial equals factorial times the next number. And then I want it to be using this variable I, because this is the number that counts up and changes. And then that's all you do. That's right there. That's the biggest part of this program is factorial times equals I. And then outside my for loop, I'm going to do a print line statement. And it's going to be factorial. Then I'll print the exclamation point equals. Nope, sorry. Factorial is going to be the answer. I want n to be the original number, and then I'll call factorial. Sorry about that. All right. So let's go ahead and run our code. So one factorial that I know the answer to is 4. 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 is going to give me the answer 24. So let's make sure that that is correct. And it is. Okay. And we can run it again. 5 should be 120. There we go. So that's working exactly as it is intended to. So just to make sure that we understand kind of what's going on with that notation, factorial times equals I. What's happening is the first run through, factorial equals 1, I equals 1, so it's 1 times 1. And then it's going to be 1 times I, and because I increments, I is going to become 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. And then 2 will be multiplied by I again, but because it increments, it is now 3. 2 times 3 is 6. And then I increments again, 4. 6 times 4 is 24. And there's our final answer. Now, how does this work for the count down scenario? Well, that one, it's not particularly hard to flip around. So all we're going to do is change our header loop. That's the only thing that's going to change. Now, instead of having or actually, I am going to change this variable. I need my factorial to start at a particular value. So I want it to start at 5 or I want it to start at 6. Since we have this variable up here where our user defines it, I'm going to have factorial start off with n. Now that means my for loop is going to need to start at the one number less than n. So I is going to be initialized to n minus 1. And for those that aren't tracking it, or if that doesn't make sense, remember, it's factorial times equals I. So if factorial starts at 5 the first time, I need I to start off at 4 in order for this to work. Because remember, it's 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Over here, it didn't matter because 1 times 1, it doesn't really impact anything. But when you're counting backwards and you have larger numbers, it's going to need to make sure that it stays consistent. So we're going to do I starting off at whatever the number is with 1 less. Now, we're going to flip this around. I needs to be greater than 0. Since we're working with multiplication, make sure I never equals 0 or it'll cancel out all of the other work. And then I will decrement where it counts backwards now. Okay, so I'm going to run this program again, and I'm going to enter 4. It should still give me 24. Okay, I'm going to enter 5. It should still give me 120, and it does. So that program is still working. And just so that I can see it, I'm going to do the factorial of 5 over here. 5 times 4 should have given me 20. And then the next iteration of my loop, I is counting down, so we have 4, now 3. 20 times 3 is 60. And then 4, 3, 2, 60 times 2 is 120. And then times 1 gives me 120 as my answer. So either one of these options are perfectly fine. You just have to think about what you want the program to do. Typically in math notation, when working with factorials, you count backwards, but if you're more comfortable having the for loop count up, there is nothing wrong with that because multiplication order doesn't matter.